All right, welcome back to One True Podcast. Brice Cherry here again. And so you've seen his work over the last month or so, but allow this to be our podcast introduction for our new Baylor football beat writer, Zach Smith. Zach, welcome aboard.
Thanks. I'm excited, happy to be here. Thanks for having me, you know.
Indeed. Zach's kind of in a state of flux right now. He's coming from the Hill Country News, so he and his wife were obviously living in the Austin area and looking for that place in Waco. I assume that's going okay.
I mean, it's going. I mean, it's a process going from one place from another and all the steps to get there. It's stressful, but you know, it's all part of the job, and we're just kind of getting through it. Luckily, Waco's not too far away, so you know, I'll be around more often than not.
Yeah, absolutely. Including this week, and that's a good segue into talking a little Baylor football. So, I mean, Zach, basically, football is here. Thursday, the Bears will hit the field for preseason camp. You know, you'll be there talking to players and Aranda and, you know, whoever they bring out, I guess, but over the next few weeks. As they start camp, I mean, what do you feel like Dave Aranda's team needs to accomplish most over these, you know, these weeks leading up to the season opener against Texas State? Like, what's the top priority?
Yeah, I think the thing that I have the most questions about is the defense overall, just kind of generally. I know Aranda is a defensive guy. But there's a lot of change there. There's a lot of change on the defensive side. Obviously, old defensive coordinator out, new one coming in. There's a little familiarity there, but like a lot of new players, a lot of unanswered questions. And in a league like the Big 12, where, you know, offense is king and every team from the top to the bottom has kind of a dynamic offense, where do the Bears defense stack up? And I think that's the biggest question going into camp.
Yeah, you know, Matt Powledge, they're high on him. They loved him as an assistant coach. Obviously, this is a new role for him, and it's interesting. After each of Dave Aranda's seasons, now they've let's see, they replaced offensive coordinator after his first season. I guess they did have 2 more seasons with Ron Roberts as defensive coordinator, but now replacing him. I mean, you know, like I said, they love Coach Powell, as they call him, and what he brings. But you're right, there are a lot of question marks on that side of the ball, and some good offenses that they'll be going up against in the Big 12 too.
Yeah, and then like ESPN did this really cool thing where they measured the percentage of production coming back, and the Baylor defense was 97th out of 131 defenses in the nation in terms of returning production. Now, they brought in some transfers like Mike Smith from Liberty and all that, but they're still losing quite a bit. And yeah.
Well, and you mentioned the transfers, and that was something, of course, we heard Dave Aranda address at Big 12 Media Days. And you got to love Aranda and his honesty. I mean, he's always very reflective and not afraid to like call himself out, you know. And basically he said, you know, he didn't feel like the year before they had basically hit the transfer portal as hard as they needed to. And so this offseason was a little different. They did bring in some guys on both sides of the ball that I think they're counting on to be, you know, key guys. And so to me, that's one of the things here in camp. I'll be interested to see how, you know, Sawyer Robertson fits in, how Mike Smith fits in, the new receiver,
Ketron Jackson from Arkansas.
Yeah. I mean, some of those guys, it'll be interesting to see how they kind of fit in the mold, because this is modern day college football now. I mean, we've got basically free agency, and I mean, this is going to be the norm, I think, going forward.
And I think, especially of all those guys you mentioned, Mike Smith, I know one of the stories that I wrote out of Media Day was on him and kind of his journey. And he's a guy that doesn't seem like he's ever going to be intimidated by the size of the moment. He started at a community college, went to Liberty, and he's kind of succeeded wherever he went. So, like, if that's any indication of how he's going to be and how he's going to be one of those transfers, I mean, I think Baylor, especially the linebacking core, is set up for something big from him, which is positive.
Yeah. And you mentioned it in your story, but I do think it's telling that here you've got this transfer and they bring him to media days. That's not always that common. I mean, he hasn't even been through a season with Baylor, but they're counting on him to be at least, I guess, one of the mouthpieces, one of the guys that they're willing to trot in front of the media and talk about the team. So that's telling to me.
Yeah, high expectations for a guy like him, and I don't think it's too much to kind of put that weight on his shoulders. I think he's ready for it and he can handle it.
Yeah. So obviously a lot of eyes will be on Blake Shapen as camp gets going. He enters his second full season as a starter. He did get some time, of course, at the end of the 2021 season, really showed some flashes of brilliance, including the Big 12 championship game that season. But, Blake was, by pretty much all accounts, even Aranda and probably even Shapen's own accounts, it was a little disappointing of a season for him last year. There was some thought, I mentioned Sawyer Robertson. There was some thought that, when Dave Aranda brought him in from Mississippi State, that might be the replacement for Blake. And then Aranda names Shapen as the starter after spring drills. So you got a chance to talk to Blake at Big 12 Media Days. What were just kind of your early impressions? And, this may not be completely fair for Blake, but do you feel like it's a make or break season for him?
I feel like it's 100% a make or break season for him. And I think he feels the exact same way. And I think, being the eternal optimist that I am, I think I lean more that he's going to make than break. I'm still kind of on the Shapen train. Maybe that's because I've only been around him a little bit here. But I think the one thing that stood out to me at Media Days, both from him and from Aranda, is you talked about that ownership that Aranda is not afraid to take. If he screws up or does something wrong, he's going to kind of own up to it. And I think that both he and Shapen kind of understand that, especially the way the season ended last year. Maybe Shapen was kind of hearing his name too much. He was seeing his name in lights and kind of eating some of the positive feedback too much that was coming to him. And I think he's kind of centered himself. I think having Sawyer here to kind of push him has been a good thing, right? I think he's a little bit, Sawyer was a 4-star prospect when he went to Mississippi State. And so that's a little bit more of a kick in the butt than I think he's had. And so I think, yes, it's 100% a make or break season. And I think he understands that last year was not good enough and he needs to step up. And I think he will, because we've seen, I know the 2021 game against Oklahoma State is kind of legendary at this point in
Right.
his book. But I mean, he's obviously got it in him. Now it's just got to be kind of doing it consistently. And with all the receivers and Richard Reese coming back, like, I think that offense is set up to be pretty elite. And Shapen he's got it in him. He just got to do it now.
Yeah, and I think some excellent points there. I agree with you really 100% in terms of, I think I've probably said it here on the podcast before, probably multiple times last season. I still feel like Blake has good days left in front of him, like good performances and maybe even his best football yet to come. And so, last year was his first full year as a starter. There was a learning curve, and The schedule was tough. I do feel like it breaks back in Baylor's direction this year. He's got a year of experience. I think that Jeff Grimes and the offensive coaches, Sean Bell and those guys, probably understand a little bit better what they have in both Blake and maybe some of the guys around him, and what works well and what maybe doesn't. And I felt like sometimes last season they shackled him too much. I wanted to see him take a few more shots down the field. He's got all the talent in the world. He was not only in high school a great football prospect, he was a great baseball prospect. He was just a tremendous athlete. And so like I said, I do feel like his best days are ahead. And I thought you made a good point about Sawyer pushing him. When Blake played some of his best football was that 2021 season when Gary Bohannon was here. And they had that competition, and so sometimes a guy just needs to be pushed. And so maybe we'll see that out of Blake this year. But I'm with you. It is definitely a make or break season. There's too many good quarterbacks on the roster, and certainly if Blake does struggle, I could see them bringing Sawyer in, and seeing how he goes. And so we'll see. I mentioned the schedule, obviously, with 8 home games. It couldn't really be a lot more favorable for the Bears. I mean, there's still some tough games in there, but your first 4, right, are at home. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think that, it'll be a month before, we have to go on the road. But so let me get a little crazy for a second. All right. Fill in the blank of this sentence. The Bears will contend for the Big 12 championship if
they beat Texas Tech on October 7th.
Okay.
I know that's probably oversimplifying everything, but I just think that game, if I were Dave Aranda and I actually circled game on the calendar, that would be circled on my calendar. I think that there are 2 top teams in the Big 12, and that's Texas and Oklahoma, right? Oklahoma is going to have a resurgent year, and Texas is going to be pretty good. I think everybody else is fighting to maybe catch Oklahoma if they stumble, or Texas does what Texas tends to do and loses a couple games that they probably shouldn't. And I think Texas Tech and Baylor and Kansas State and TCU are all right there. And so I think that game against Texas Tech, if Baylor wins that game, then there's a pretty good chance that they're 2-1 going into the bye week, right? And then they have at Cincinnati, Iowa State, and Houston. Those are all, in my opinion, pretty winnable games. 2 of those are at home, right? And then back-to-back road games against Kansas State and TCU. You'd think that those would be like probably going to lose. TCU is in the college football playoff. Kansas State brings back plenty. But both of those games are the week after those teams play against Texas, if that makes any sense, right?
Yeah.
So, Kansas State plays Texas on the 4th, and then Baylor gets them. And, same thing with TCU. So I think that both of those teams are going to be up for that game against Texas, because that's their last year in the SEC and before going to the SEC. And I don't know. I think there's an opportunity for Baylor to get both of those games. So that's why I circled Texas Tech as the game that can kind of change the direction of the season.
Yeah, I like that. That might bode well for the Bears in terms of good mojo, because so they went to Lubbock last year, and it was their first trip to Lubbock in a long time. Or did I not go the last time? I'm trying to remember. Maybe 2 years ago, John went by himself. But at any rate, they had a long stretch where I think it was their first trip to Lubbock in forever, last season, because they had a long stretch where that series was played up at Jerry World every year. And then they finally decided, oh, let's go back to home and home. And so the first year that they went back to home and home, Tech came here to Waco. And so last year, Baylor went out there and it was Patrick Mahomes night. They were retiring his jersey. Everyone was in black. It was a night game in Lubbock. It all set up for Tech, right? To just really almost roll over Baylor. And Baylor played just unbelievably good. It was easily the best performance by Baylor's secondary all year. I want to say they had 4 interceptions. A lot of those young defensive backs that they've got really showed out in that game. And so, maybe that's a good sign. I'm sure Tech will remember that game and want to get a little payback as they come to Waco. It won't be easy. I think Joey McGuire's doing a good job. I think he's a good fit for that program there in Lubbock. But I like that as kind of a linchpin, circle it kind of game. Obviously, you have to be consistent to win the Big 12. I mean, you're going to have to win a lot of games, but it does, to me, bode well for Baylor that they get so many of them at home. You do avoid both Oklahoma teams? You don't
both
play
Oklahoma teams.
Yeah,
Both
Oklahoma
teams.
Yeah, so those are 2 good ones to avoid. I mean,
yeah, especially OU. I think OSU is probably going to be down a little bit this year, but yeah, you never know.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll see. Obviously the preseason poll didn't think too highly of any of the new teams in the league. But Baylor's got a couple road games that they've got to go, there to some new opponents in UCF and Cincinnati. So it'll be interesting. I mean, we'll know a lot more. Obviously, once September gets here and we get a chance to really see this team against some actual opponents, including that second game of the year, I think that'll tell us a lot.
Amen to that.
Utah. I mean, that's a good one. All right, so the other big news of the week in terms of the Big 12 was the addition of Colorado to the conference last week. You and I talked a little bit about it the other day, but what do you kind of make of the return of the Buffaloes to the Big 12? And surely, I mean, you don't want an odd number of teams next season in 2024. This is not the last domino to fall, right?
Can't be. It can't be. I mean, I think the thing that makes the most sense is just adding Utah, because it feels like the Arizona schools are a package deal. I know they were supposed to meet, not to date this, today, Tuesday. I haven't heard anything from that meeting, but I think it's a no-brainer to add a school like Colorado back. Last time Colorado was any good, they were in the Big 12 or what was the Big 12, and Deion Sanders is going to be electric, and whether they're good this year or next year or 2 years down the road, like, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer for the Big 12. You gotta try to keep pace. And even if eventually this ends up being, the Big 2 and the SEC and the Big 10, at least your mark and the Big 12 are trying. They're trying. They're doing everything they can to keep pace. So I think it's a necessary evil at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, it's so good for the Big 12 from just an optics standpoint, because here's the thing. I mentioned this to you the other day. Since the Big 12's first little fissures came in, when Nebraska and Colorado left and A&M left and Missouri left, and then, of course, OU and Texas, this will be the first Power 5 team that the Big 12 has added. They added West Virginia, TCU. They came from other, what I would call minor conferences. Obviously, you had the Group of 5 additions, and John Werner and I always said from the Group of 5, they couldn't have really done much better than the 4 they added. I thought they added 4 really strong football programs in markets that they hadn't been in bigger cities. I mean, that was kind of something different in getting Houston, UCF, Cincy, BYU. BYU obviously has a big following. But all that to say, and you could consider BYU maybe as like a Power 5 type school, just they were independent, but certainly at that caliber a lot of seasons. But to get Colorado, even coming off a really crappy season, it's still, to me, is a flex,
Yeah.
and as you said, Dion brings them a lot of just swagger.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to do probably great in recruiting. And so I do think that this is not just the first domino to fall for the Big 12, but probably not the last one to fall for the Pac-12.
Yeah.
Because they can sit there and puff up their chest all they want. I saw the quote from the Oregon coach where he was like, Colorado hadn't won anything. And he's right. But at the same time, just before that, they were preaching solidarity, solidarity. And now Colorado's leaving. So I feel like it's going to be every man for themselves.
Where do you think they go? Do you think they continue out west, or is there an eastern
I
school
feel
they
like
can pull?
you mentioned Arizona and Arizona State as a package deal. I don't know. We'll see. I feel like Arizona has always been more interested in the Big 12 than maybe Arizona State has. And so I feel like Arizona's like the number one choice, and for multiple reasons. Part of the interest, that they've had, but also the basketball component. I mean, you're adding one of the premier basketball programs in the country to a league that a lot of people would say is already the best men's basketball league in the country. So
add Houston to that. That's
yeah, exactly. So to me, Arizona would be top choice. If you get Arizona, can you maybe pick off Arizona State and Utah? Possibly. I do feel like at some point they're going to cap it, in terms of this is our number, I don't think they want to split up the pie between like 20 teams, I mean, the idea of a super conference has been talked about a lot, but you are, having to divvy up all that money between all those teams. So I think 14 might be the number, but I don't think they would turn down 16 teams.
No. I mean, I know that money is what stirs the drink, and everybody wants their share of it. But yeah, I think 16 is where they're headed, personally. But
we'll see if Utah or Arizona or any of those teams really decide they want to join the Big 12. I mean, I think the backup plan then, you've heard these teams mentioned a lot, would be somebody like a UConn, which doesn't bring you a lot in football, but again, pretty salty in basketball.
Yeah.
And then, they've even talked about adding Gonzaga as a basketball only school. Man, if you had UConn, Gonzaga, maybe Arizona, good grief. I mean,
good Lord,
that basketball league would be NBA junior.
I mean, it's Big 12 title would be like, NCAA tournament light, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you'd probably, if you could survive that gauntlet, you'd feel pretty good about what you could do in the NCAA tournament for sure. Well, we'll start getting some of the answers to these questions over the next few weeks. And of course, Zach and I will be back to bring it all to you. Be sure to read wacotrib.com and pick up the paper. And we'll have, special guests on to talk about games and all that good stuff. But Zach, appreciate it, man. Good stuff.
Happy to be here.